I'd like to call to order tonight's meeting of the Albany City Council, Tuesday, February 18th. And Councilmember Barnes, would you please lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. And may I have a roll call, please?
Councilmember Barnes?
Present.
Councilmember Moss?
Here.
Councilmember Nason?
Here.
Vice Mayor McQuaid?
Here.
And Mayor Pilch.
Yes, here. And we have no ceremonial matters. Item 3. I would like to report on closed session for the item 2-1, Saraswati versus City of Albany. We approved a settlement. For item 2-2, conference with legal counsel, we gave direction to staff. Moving on to the consent calendar. The consent calendar items are considered to be routine and will be enacted by one motion. There'll be no separate discussion on these items unless a council member or member of the audience requests removal of one of the items from the consent calendar. Do any of my council members wish to remove an item for discussion? Seeing none, do any members of the public wish to remove an item for discussion from the consent calendar?
I'll move consent.
Second. Second.
The consent is moved and seconded. Roll call, please.
Councilmember Barnes?
Yes.
Councilmember Moss?
Yes.
Councilmember Nason?
Yes.
Vice Mayor McQuaid?
Yes.
Mayor Pilch.
Yes.
The motion carries.
All right, moving on to item 6, good of the city or public comment for persons wishing to address the city council on an item that is not on the agenda. Our policy limits each speaker up to 3 minutes. Mayor may reduce the time limit per speaker. Brown Act limits the ability for the council to take or discuss items that are not on the agenda. Does anyone want to speak on good of the city public comment on an item that is not on the agenda? Seeing none, I'll close that and move on to city subcommittee reports and councilmember reports on appointed representation and other meetings and events. Would anyone like to go first? Councilmember Nason?
Subcommittees? No.
Subcommittees? No. Let's see. Yes, we have subcommittees first. Do we have any subcommittee reports? Yes. Vice Mayor.
I'll report on the Youth Engagement Subcommittee. As we've reported before, we've been discussing and working with the Albany Y on creating a local government module to be part of their national program of youth in government. So I'd like to invite all of the council members on Monday, March 2nd. Let me back up just a little bit. The students that are in the youth in government program the seniors, will be coming to City Hall in the afternoon after they get out of school for a tour of City Hall, tour of the police department, and to meet with the various department heads to learn a little bit more about local government. There'll also be a dinner with the council members, and so I'd like to invite all of you to dinner with the youth and government students at 5 o'clock. It'll be here in the council chambers. And that gives the youth and government students an opportunity to talk to the council about what it's like to be an elected official in Albany, and for us to talk to them about things that they'd like to see Albany do better or maybe not do at all. And then during the council meeting, there will be a proclamation recognizing youth in government.
Thank you very much. What is the date on that?
It's Monday, March 2nd. It's our next council meeting.
Okay, Monday, March 2nd, 5 p.m. I think you said the dinner.
Yes.
Thank you for that. Perhaps I ought to just give an informal report on the Cannabis Ordinance Subcommittee. We have been, Councilmember Moss and I have been exchanging notes, and we have some draft language, but we are not quite ready to bring that to the council. Anything to add?
I think we're going to do it, yeah?
Yeah, we will schedule an update by the subcommittee for one of your meetings in March, hopefully March 2nd. Just need to look at the calendar, but we do have a draft memo and some your good research to discuss.
Okay. Very good. And any other subcommittees? Seeing none, appointed representation. Anyone want to report? Vice Mayor?
I'll just say that the Housing Authority is meeting tomorrow, actually, because of the holiday, the county holiday last week. But I did sit on the interview panel for the new executive director, and we'll be recommending 2 candidates to the Board of Supervisors.
I'm sorry, what was that again? What body?
Housing Authority.
Housing Authority, thank you. Okay. Anyone else?
Yeah, on the 7th, Vice Mayor McQuaid and myself attended the ABAG General Assembly meeting. The main topic at that meeting was housing. And in the aftermath of the end of SB 50, there was a panel that included Assemblymember Chu and State Senators Wiener and Beal. This was followed by a meeting to presumably to sort of explain to all the city representatives how they're going to come up with the regional housing needs requirements. It seemed at the time that they were looking for more feedback from cities as to how those numbers should be formulated, but they will be coming down the pike in the next year or so.
Okay. Thank you. I can report that the Vice Mayor and I went to the Mayor's Conference in Alameda. They were a tough act to follow, so I'll be planning a lot of festivities for our Mayor's Conference coming up in Albany in March. There was a presentation on the census by the woman whose name I'm forgetting, Casey Farmer, who is heading that effort at the county. And I went to the Projects and Programs subcommittee meeting of the County Waste Management Authority, Stop Waste, and that consisted completely of 3 presentations from third parties who process dishes and glassware for programs that do reusable foodware. So they'll take a restaurant's dishware and wash them for them and bring it back, that sort of thing. So that was interesting. Any other appointed bodies? If not, we'll move on to any other meetings of note. Council members, Vice Mayor?
I think for perhaps the first time ever, all 5 of us were at the Chamber of Commerce mixer. The mayor and I attended the ribbon cutting of the new building at Albany High School. And I attended a coffee with the cops the other day. And then I had the privilege and the pleasure of attending the Youth in Government Day in Sacramento, the VIP Day in Sacramento last Friday, and got to watch our students and students from all over California in their experience at Youth in Government.
Great.
Yes. Yeah, I attended the Berkeley City Council on February the 11th, and the reason was our Albany Cares funding, which comes through the mental health, our mental health collaboration with Berkeley, had been on their agenda at their preceding meeting. And one member of the Berkeley City Council had opposed the funding, although they're really only a pass-through for funding to come to Albany. And I attended because one of the council members had said that made some very negative comments about Albany as a collaborator on homeless issues, and stated that he was concerned that funding for Albany Cares was essentially funding for Albany to send its people suffering from poverty to Berkeley. So I attended the following meeting to say, on my own behalf, not speaking for the city or for this council, but to say on, as an individual who has been involved with poverty issues and homelessness in Albany for a number of years now, that is most certainly not our policy, and we're eager to collaborate with Berkeley. And interestingly, a couple of other things came up. One was the status of our mental health collaboration, which apparently Berkeley has already decided at the council level to terminate. And the other was an indication that Berkeley is interested in leasing land from Caltrans in Albany as its location for a homeless shelter for the RVs that it is planning to remove from its streets, and that they'd like to have them, Berkeley would like to lease land in Albany, Caltrans land in Albany, as the location for an RV location. So,
Did they point out where that might be in Caltrans land, the wetland where Buchanan crosses underneath?
yes, I think it's the land as you drive over the railroad tracks on Buchanan as you're going. You're driving over the railroad tracks. Right. You look to your right, and there is an open area there.
Right.
As I understand it, you're not allowed to put any kind of housing or shelter underneath the freeway structures themselves. So that's a bit of land that is not quite under the freeway structure that Berkeley is hoping to rent from Caltrans.
Interesting.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that, for those remarks. And I approached the mayor of Berkeley at the mayor's conference and told him that I'd heard about this and that I'd be very happy to talk to him about that. And he gave some indication that he might do that.
There are several subjects now. There is the mental health collaboration, there is collaboration on homeless issues, and there is collaboration on the blockage of the public trail from East Shore Highway in Albany over to the 2nd Street cul-de-sac on Cordonices Creek. And we are clearly need to have a little more collaboration with our neighbor.
And you had a meeting with Councilmember Kesarwani of Berkeley?
Yes.
On that?
Yes.
Is there anything?
I mean, there have been meetings and discussions over time. The fence is now built. The public access, which has existed for many decades, so far as I know, is now gone.
Okay. Thank you for that. Anyone else with other meetings? As mentioned, the chamber mixer I attended the new high school building ribbon cutting. And I attended a couple of meetings of a organization called the Voter Participation Project, I think it is, which was an interesting organization that attempts to use direct mail to get voters to register to vote, which I thought was an awesome thing to do. I attended the Climate Mayor's call, and were you on that call as well?
No, I was at the caucusing.
Okay, and that was an very interesting call, actually, although I'm not remembering any details, I'm sorry, at this point. And I think that'll do it for me. And if there are no other meetings to report on, let's go to the city manager report.
Thank you, Mayor. I'd like to highlight a couple of recent events that occurred in Albany. We had over 85 people attend our recycling workshop. I really would like to thank our environmental staff, Claire Griffing and Lizzie Carrad, for spearheading this effort and helping refresh our memories on what goes where in terms of recycling. It's changed over time, so definitely take a look at our website if you have questions. I know it gets confusing quickly. We also had a very sweet visit to our Friendship Club. This is our after-school childcare program by our fire department personnel on fire safety awareness and emergency preparation and evacuation. We have quite a few openings on some of our advisory bodies and other commissions. We are looking for someone to become a member of the Paratransit Advisory and Planning Committee of Alameda County Transportation Commission. You can see the application on our website. We also have openings based on recent council action in a new committee, Financial Advisory Committee. Again, the application is on our website, where we have 5 vacancies on this group. Looking forward to starting this advisory committee to the council, primarily to review budget and audit and other financial advisory policies. Our specific plan for San Pablo Avenue will be kicking off this month, and we really look forward to that process. Stay tuned for updates to our city website. We'll build out a page in particular for this overall planning process, and really looking forward to a robust and inclusive process to envision the future of San Pablo Avenue. I'd also like to express appreciation to the Albany Unified School District Superintendent for helping us work through a interim solution to some missing basketball court hoops at the Albany High School. And we really were able to problem solve together well, and hopefully the new amenities on the other side of the high school corridor, where 2 basketball courts will be replaced, help solve the issue for that local community concern. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you. I forgot at the beginning of the meeting to note that it is African American History Month, and the city has sponsored several events that I think have already passed. One was a poet presentation, or a forum with a poet, African American poet, and I think there is one event still to come, or was that tonight? Anyway, I'll try to look it up while we're here and announce it at the end. But I did want to make a note of that event. And if that does it for the city manager report, we're on to presentations. The first item, 9.1, is a presentation about public banks. Now, I was at the League of California Cities conference that I attended. I attended the presentation on San Francisco's study of public banks. A public bank would be a bank basically formed by a public entity, by government. And San Francisco commissioned a study, and that study is public, and it's recommended study 3 different options on how to do it. And I was approached by Susan Harmon, who wanted to talk about that at our council, and I welcomed the opportunity to have that discussed here, or have a presentation done here. So I believe there's a Margie Lewis and a Jake Varghese, who are here to present on that. So thank you for coming, and come right up. Thank you.
Good evening. Thank you for having us. We appreciate it, Mayor and City Council people. And we are representatives of the Friends of the Public Bank of the East Bay. So, what is a public bank? In October of 2019, Governor Newsom signed AB 857 into law. It enables a pathway for cities and regions in California to create public banks in their areas. This is the first time in over 100 years that the road to a public bank has been formally established. There is functionally only one public bank currently in the United States, which is the Public Bank of North Dakota, that was created over 100 years ago. There is a public bank on a Native American reservation, and there is the Public Bank of American Samoa, but for our purposes, the Bank of North Dakota is what is relevant to us. With AB 857's passage, California cities and regions are now empowered to create public banks which will enable the financing of affordable housing, small business loans, renewable energy infrastructure, clean energy, green energy projects, local projects, and other critical economic needs. This will give municipalities a voice in determining the future of economic development in our local communities, like Albany. This act proved that we can shift power away from profit-motivated and privately owned Wall Street shareholders into the hands of the people. AB 857 was passed entirely with grassroots support. We had no funding, no paid lobbyists, and we really faced major organized opposition from Wall Street banks. No longer will cities be forced to pay high interest rates that benefit shareholders residing out of our area and often out of the country. The interest will be paid to the public bank, which will in turn pass it back to its member municipalities. The decisions about what the bank invests in will be based on the values that the Public Bank Board agrees on. For instance, public banks will not invest in fossil fuels. Many cities like San Francisco, LA, cities around the country have voted to divest their holdings in fossil fuel companies, but only the Wall Street banks have the capacity to handle the amount of monies that cities work with and all the transactions that they make on a daily basis. Community banks and credit unions don't have the capacity, and credit unions are not legally allowed to engage in the transactions that cities require. Public banks will be designed specifically to handle cities' banking needs. They will also, as included in the law, partner with community banks and credit unions to make affordable loans to local small businesses and individuals and to address the needs of the unbanked and underbanked. Our board will be transparent and have professionals like lawyers, banking experts, compliancy experts on it, as well as some elected officials and community members. In the East Bay, we also plan to develop an academy to educate our non-banker board members and to help our professional bankers and other board members learn how to navigate this new type of banking. We borrowed this concept from the very successful network of German public banks, which have been in existence for 200 years, and as you know, are the backbone of Europe's financial success. We hope to open the Academy to the public to help expand financial literacy and public understanding of money and banking. And now Jake is going to tell you about how that partnership is working in North Dakota and give you a few statistics about the rate of return that the Bank of North Dakota is getting now and how phenomenally successful they are and how they stack up compared to the Wall Street banks. And we have a trifold flyer on the back table for people. Take it away, Jake.
Hey everyone, I'm Jake. I'm going to just give you a couple quick statistics about BND and what they're able to do from a different perspectives of the city government and of the economy. So one example is Red Dog Brewery, which is a brewing company in North Dakota. They wanted to double the size of their brewery capacity. And so what happened is they went to their local bank. Normally, a $10 million expansion would not be able to be capitalized by any credit union or public bank that we know of. So what happened? Well, the credit union goes to the Public Bank of North Dakota. They say, this is a really good credit, or this is a very worthy credit, so let's do this. And they give them the full $10 million. They split it. Bank of North Dakota takes half the profit, and then the local bank takes half the profit. The local bank services that loan. And then what else happens is, since the Bank of North Dakota is interested in the economy more than profits, they can actually give very special incentives to local businesses. So what they actually did for the brewing company is they actually took away their interest payments for 2 years and cut their principal payments in half for 2 years. Because what happens is, when you're creating something like a brewery, it takes time to build up to capacity. So the bank actually allowed them to do that by giving them the time and taking away the payments. So yeah, it comes off of their profit, but they're still getting 2%, and eventually that profit comes back to the city and the state. So that actually helps out tremendously in multiplying the money and the profits around the community. Another example is that all infrastructure in North Dakota can be financed by the public bank directly at 2%. And let's remember, North Dakota only has one congressional district, so that means there's less than 770,000 people in the entire state. We have 50 here in California. So if we had an actual state bank, it would be extraordinarily powerful, and it can go way below 2% because all the profits are just coming back to us. And this is all non-tax revenue, so we get all this extra money that we can now spend on things for free. So we can give out many more grants. We can have, create affordable housing or do green energy infrastructure experimental projects that, normally we have to go find external, national, federal funding for. And yeah, I mean, they also help with, the last one is a student refinancing that they've been doing since I think 2008, where they'll consolidate all the students' loans and refinance it for 2% or 2.5% or something ridiculously low. And then the other thing is they actually have an incentivization program that helps people come from out of state to come in there so that they can get their student loan balance or student loan debt refinanced as part of an incentive to come there and work there. And yeah, there's quite a few other examples, but I think I'm running out of time, so I'll just ask a question. Oh, the financial collapse. Oh yeah, so let's just talk about Wall Street in general. Wall Street returns 11% to their shareholders. That's the final 11% of the stock to their shareholders. That's after bonuses, after tips, and after commissions. And let's also remember one thing. Bank of North Dakota does not participate in all the shady financial activities that Wall Street does. They don't do derivatives, they don't do stocks, they don't do any of that stuff. They do straight commercial banking, and they've actually found a way to make it extremely profitable for North Dakota. They return 18% to the state every single year, and that's on average. So sometimes they return 22. And let's also remember that Wall Street is after the bonus and tips, so I wouldn't be surprised if the actual profits of the Wall Street banks are closer to 30%. And it's just being sucked dry. So all that money that's going to buy extra yachts can actually, buy solar panels and build roads and bridges and redo our schools. And so there's so many more productive purposes that we can do with the profits that we just hand over to our banks right now. Oh yeah, sorry. There's so many points. So when in 2008, when the economy collapsed, North Dakota was actually fine and fully in the black the entire time. Everyone thinks that has to do with their the oil excavation and the fracking that's going on there, but that didn't happen until 2010. And so basically, they were able to stay in the black the entire time through the recession, and only had a small dip in their unemployment because the local banks were able to finance and help all the local businesses that were struggling through that time.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to see if we could get a few questions from the council. Let me start it off. So that's North Dakota. I'd be very interested to hear if San Francisco is making any movement on forming a public bank. And I assume that the East Bay effort is just beginning, that there's nothing concrete yet. But can you tell me anything about San Francisco and maybe the East Bay?
Well, San Francisco has decided they're doing some further studies, and my understanding is they're going to go with a revolving loan fund, I believe, for 2 years and then go into a bank. The East Bay is in a different position. We are currently fundraising, so I want to invite everybody, go on our website. It's on the brochure in the back. We're having a victory fundraising brunch on March 28th. Anyway, we are fundraising for a business plan, and the business plan is what is going to be like the application for a bank. So once we have the money for the business plan, we will be like in the first position to go forward. And so we want to encourage all the cities to put their money in our bank.
Okay, thank you. Do my council members have any questions?
I'll ask one. Most private banks, I think, have billions of dollars in there that they're playing with. How much does a public bank need?
To just get started, I think the California minimum is like 25 million, but that's just too small for a public bank. It would take way too long to build that up. So what we would want to do is basically put in the most amount of money we can to capitalize it. So immediately we can get off the ground running with the leverage, because the power of the bank is the leverage of the reserves, because we can leverage up 10x of the reserve and then only like 1x of the deposits. And so that's basically how we can fund all the economic initiatives around the East Bay area.
And all this funding is coming from private parties?
No. We have to get into the details of how a bank works, but basically it would be our money. So the city, the way it would work is you would look at your accounts, and there's going to be two types of accounts. You're going to have accounts that are just supposed to designed to just sit there, like rainy day accounts and savings accounts, and then you have actual deposit accounts that are transactions that need to go out, monthly or weekly or whatever for payroll. Those accounts, the deposit accounts, are going to be regular deposit accounts in the bank. The other accounts are what we think are excellent, are identified for being capital reserve accounts in the bank. So those are the ones that we can actually leverage up. We can put into equity. And then what happens is in North Dakota, when they do this, they don't have a rainy day fund in North Dakota, because they don't need a bank account in North Dakota to do that, because they have a bank. So whenever they need money, they just go to the bank and take a profit payment. So it's just basically free money. So we're basically switching out the rainy day fund for equity into the bank. And then when you need that fund for a rainy day, you just go to the bank and get it, because it's now our bank.
So are you proposing having any sponsoring body like the county, or would this be a completely new entity, nonprofit entity that would be the public bank?
It's completely new. The Department of Business Oversight and the Federal Reserve are actually, as we speak, working out the details, because this has never existed. It's uncharted territory. And then once they decide, then we can apply. And how we would like to apply is as the East Bay. Now, where the bank will be, it'll either probably be in the county, could be in Hayward, I'm not sure. We're not sure exactly where it's going to live yet, but it doesn't matter, because people aren't really going to go there. Yeah. It's going to be the repository of like Berkeley and Richmond and Oakland and hopefully Albany and all these other municipalities.
Yeah, it's not going to be a retail bank.
It's not a retail bank, it's a wholesale bank.
It's a partner bank.
A banker's bank.
Right. No, I just wondered whether it's a JPA or if it was just a nonprofit entity in a standalone entity. Sounds like it's going to be a standalone entity.
Yeah, but I think it's also going to be a bank, in that the DBO is going to recognize it as a bank of some sort.
Right.
But then it's going to probably give it like its own.
Okay. Thank you. I want to move along, but do we have one or two questions from the audience? Or, yeah.
Jake, Margie, Jake, V as in Victor, ARGHESE, ESE, yeah, and Margie, MA.
Okay. All right, thanks. Yeah, we'll move on. Thank you so much for coming. And then the brochures are in back. All right, thank you so much. All right, moving on to the quarterly financial update. And our Director of Finance, Heather Rowden, will be presenting that. Did I pronounce it right? Is it Rowden? No, Rowden. All right, thank you.
Yeah, it's not originally my name, so I'll answer to whatever. So I don't normally have an audience, so I would definitely like to plug the Finance Committee. Everyone should apply. It'll be fun. I'll make cookies. Can I do that? Perfect.
I'm in.
All right.
Resign from council and do that.
So second quarter was done the end of December. So we're giving the second quarter update. It takes a couple weeks in order for us to compile all of the entries and everything that, came together in December. So I generally won't be able to present this the next month, but so this is for the end of December. This graph is in the report that I gave you, but I updated it a little bit to try to highlight when we spend money. So one of the things that I try to point out in the report is that there are a lot of accounts that are front-loaded. So we spend all of the money in the first 1 or 2 months of the year, and then we don't really spend as much money in the rest of the year. And you can really see that in risk management and non-departmental all the way on the right. The non-departmental is our CalPERS unfunded liability payment. So this one was 1.9 million, something like that for this year. And that is a one-time payment. We're never going to make it again for the year. So you see basically all of that amount that was budgeted was spent in the first quarter of the year. And then there's a tiny little bit of other expenses that came out. Risk management, all of our insurance payments come out in July, and then we spend, just a tiny amount extra for other deductible payments and things like that for insurance.
Just to stop you there, so that particular chart I don't think is in our staff report. That seems to be or is it?
It is, it's just different colors.
Different colors, that's it.
When-
You have 3 colors, we only have 2.
I know. I thought of this genius thing to show you just the other day. I had already
Okay.
given you the report.
That explains it, thank you.
So, but you can see that for most of the departments, we're spending on a fairly regular basis. The first and second quarters are, fairly similar. Some of them are going to change, like you'll see the city clerk, she went to a training. And so that brought her up a little bit. There was a little bit more in the second quarter.
Okay. And I want to applaud our city attorney for having not spent very much at all.
So this is a comparison of our expenses and our revenues over the last 4 years. You'll see that year over year, both the expenses and the revenues are going up. I wanted to point out that this year it looks like our expenses have jumped a lot. Part of that is what we did with the budget this year. Instead of separating out all of the expenses into different funds, we're bringing everything back into the general fund that, the city is going to spend regardless of where the funding source comes from. And then we're doing transfers of that money with the backup to show, this is what we're spending that money on back into the general fund. So this is a little bit skewed because we normally would have spent that money, it just would have been in special revenue funds instead of in the general fund. And this is our property tax revenue. Our revenues aren't as nice and even over the course of the year as our expenses generally, except for those 2 departments. And it's due to property tax. We get our property tax payments in December and then sometime in the fourth quarter. So you'll see that over the 4 quarters of the year, we only get a very small amount in quarter 1, and now we've pretty much caught up to where we should be. The transient occupancy or hotel tax is new, and I know people have had a lot of questions. The first half of the year for this year was due January 31st. So those have all come through. We currently, as of last Friday, have 29 registered properties. There are still some people who have gotten letters and haven't responded, and so we will be following up on those. We have, since January 31st, we've received about $33,000 in transient occupancy taxes. And then our business licenses were due January 31st as well. We mailed 2,050 renewals. All of the renewals that were sent in on time, so that January 31st deadline, have been processed, and those have been sent out to people. We're still working on some of the stragglers, and then sending out bills for interest and penalties for anything that hasn't come in yet. And so that is it for second quarter.
Okay, thank you. I have one quick question. Hopefully it's quick. A couple of slides ago, it said there's 40 active listings where the property can't be identified.
Right. So the company that we are using takes listings. They scour the internet for, I've posted my property for rent. And they compare that listing to Google Street View to see if they can find what your house looks like, if there have been any other listings that list the property address. So sometimes people were renting long-term and the address was in that ad, and they can compare the pictures. And so once they find the address, they can compare it to the property tax listings. There are some where they just can't compare it to anything. It's inside pictures that aren't compared to anything else that's on the internet. So not that anyone should start trying to, hide everything. Don't do that. That's bad.
What came to mind is if, and I know sometimes on a service like Airbnb, the owner of the property will, not publish the address until you've actually signed up to rent it. Can we take steps to ask, if that were the case, could our service take steps to ask that agency, Airbnb, or that company, to provide those addresses to us?
We don't currently have any agreements with Airbnb, so I'm not sure. We are going to look into potentially if there's a blanket agreement that they have with some other smaller cities.
Okay. Okay. All right. Interesting. It just strikes me that there are. Well, I hope we can pursue those 40. Do my council members have questions? Councilmember Nason.
As far as questions, I mean, you. On this particular slide or on the whole presentation?
Or any of the presentation, just questions.
Oh, okay, so we're done with the presentation.
Correct.
My main concern is the budget to actuals report.
Mm-hmm.
The budget numbers are not, in many cases, are not precisely the numbers that we approved when we adopted the budget. And I'm wondering what accounts for those changes?
So there have been a handful of appropriations over the course of the year, so those would be included. And then there are some where there were a few, when we uploaded the budget, we're still working on, we've been trying to get the CAFR completed and the fixed asset inventory that we're doing right now. So we're still working on tweaking those few things that didn't flow through on the upload.
Okay. It would be helpful when we get a budget report, if we are using different numbers than the approved budget, it would be good to have, footnotes or whatever that explain, here's why this number is not the same number that was approved when the budget was adopted. Thank you.
Councilmember Moss or Barnes? No questions? Does any member of the public wish to speak on this item? If you do, please come to the podium.
I'm from Gateview. I've been living here more than 40 years. I'm on the finance committee of Gateview, and we have this problem in a very acute fashion that people are using Airbnb inside Gateview. That causes a lot of cost, a lot of moves in and out, and people also are absolutely not aware of how Gateview works. So they will go down the swimming pool with drinks and things like that. So we are desperately trying to figure out who is doing short-term rentals. And we would like to cooperate with Albany to figure out who is doing what. And we would like to charge them for the costs they make us incur. I have a friend who has 3 giant properties in Tahoe where he has this problem, and he found a system to have everybody register officially and pay like a 10% tax to his condominium system. So I think this is a very important thing, and we really, at Gateview, would really like to cooperate, and we are pondering if there was a means to force these companies, Airbnb and company, to declare where the properties are. So they have been cracking down recently because there have been murders and a few other problems like that, and they delist some properties. So we should make so, I mean, there is Newsom, there is the state of California, they should pass some laws to force all this to be overboard and not to be a parallel black market, mafia-style economy. So this is an open debate, but we in Gateview want very, very much to solve this situation. So we ask for your cooperation.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you. I suggest that you reach the finance department during business hours. Are these public records? The tax
Registrations?
the properties that are paying this tax?
I'd have to look into it.
Okay. Yeah, I do suggest you get in touch with the finance department during the business hours. Thank you. Any other members of the public who wish to speak on this item? If not, bringing it back to council for final questions or comments?
No.
Okay. I do think that there is the larger cities have had a lot of problems with Airbnb being the biggest one of these broker companies, and yeah, to the extent that we can have legislations that makes them more transparent and cooperative to cities, I would certainly support that. And okay, so that's it for our quarterly financial update. Thank you, Heather. And that was for information purposes only. We move on to public hearing, which I imagine is the item that a lot of you are here for. Item 10.1, application for a new townhouse project at the northwest corner of Portland and Kains Avenue, 634 Kains Avenue, and I assume you have a staff report.
Yes, thank you. Good evening, Mayor Pilch and members of the council. I'm Jean Iceberg, the contract planner for this item, which is 634 Kains Avenue. This is a public hearing. Oops. So the request before the council includes entitlements for a 9-unit townhome project at Portland and Kains. We're asking that you receive the staff presentation. The applicant is prepared with the presentation as well. Open up the public hearing to receive public comment, and our staff recommendation is to adopt the resolution improving the entitlements. This is the site location, the north side of Portland, between San Pablo to the west and Kains Avenue to the east. The current parcel configuration, it's a little hard to see here, but there are 4 lots that are under common ownership in this sort of L shape. The project is, again, a 9-unit townhome. There's a lot line adjustment proposed to create a parcel for the townhomes, and then this resulting flag lot for the existing restaurant, which would remain. As part of the proposal, the parking lot would be reconfigured, which I'll talk more about, and also we'll get into a little bit more discussion, but the resulting lot would have 2 zoning districts, the San Pablo Commercial SPC and the R3 zoning. The zoning on the townhome lot would remain R3. Multiple components of the entitlement. The request is for design review, approval of the state density bonus law application, a tentative map to create the condos, an affordable housing agreement, the reduction in parking for the restaurant parcel, a tree removal permit, and administrative action for the lot line adjustment. Notably, the Planning Commission reviewed and recommends to the City Council design review and the parking reduction. The Parks and Rec Commission provides a recommendation that's advisory to the Council for the tree removal permit. Unlike some other projects that might just be reviewed at the Planning Commission level, this project is here because of the state density bonus law application, because of the tentative map, and because of the affordable housing agreement, which are Council actions. So we've wrapped them all up here for the Council's review and approval. So just to recap, the first and third bullets, the Planning Commission reviewed the entitlement separately, recommending the Council approve design review and density bonus in September. In December, the Planning Commission reviewed the recommendation to approve a reduction in parking for the restaurant parcel and the tentative map. The Planning Commission did make the findings for the restaurant parking reduction, but asked for more information to be presented to the Council to strengthen those findings. The second bullet, the Parks and Rec Commission could not make a recommendation on the tree permit. I'll go into more detail about that further in the presentation. And then lastly, just summarizing, the project is consistent with the zoning ordinance and the general plan land use designation. So here's a site plan. We have Portland on the plan left and Kains at the bottom here. So this is a corner lot. So Portland as the shorter segment is defined as the front yard and Kains as the side yard. There are individual entrances on Kains, ground level open space in the rear, and entrances to the one-car garages on Kains. There are shared driveways with 5 new curb cuts on Kains and 1 curb cut removed on Portland. 3 levels, the bottom level, again, the garage and a bedroom. The bedroom's on the main floor. This is a stoop entry, and the living space and a deck on the upper floor. The design is contemporary attached townhomes with open gable roofs. The facades have a variety of window sizes, front stoops at the ground level. The upper decks are alternating with each townhome. This was came out of a request by the Planning Commission to show more articulation in the facades and also provides privacy to the residents. In terms of colors and materials, this is integral stucco in 3 alternating white and gray tones, composite shingle roofs, wood doors and stairs, and aluminum windows. I mentioned the Parks and Recs Commission review. They could not make a recommendation on the tree permit. This is about the request to remove the existing street trees at the sidewalk. The commission requested that the applicant try to retain those trees if possible. If they do need to replace the trees, recommended a replacement of 3 to 1, asked the tree wells to be expanded, and lastly, to consult with urban forester, the city's urban forester, on alternate species. So the applicant is going to attempt to preserve those trees. It might not be possible. They're going to be replacing the sidewalk, tying in those utilities. So we do have a condition of approval to try to work this out. But in the meantime, we are requesting that the council approve this street tree removal. Again, this is a density bonus project. The application includes 1 below market rate unit for low-income households. This also satisfies the city's inclusionary housing requirement. And there are several waivers and concessions requested. First, a waiver to reduce the front setback. So on Portland, from 15 to 10 feet, and the rear setback, that's the internal yard to the neighbor, from 15 to 5 feet. Also a waiver to reduce the daylight plane and height limit from 15 feet to 10 feet. And then lastly, a concession to allow those front stoops into the side setback on Kains. I mentioned the parcel configuration. So the lot line adjustment would reduce the number of parcels from 4 to 2. The resulting lots would be legally conforming parcels, but the western parcel would have 2 zoning designations. So this 33-foot deep section of R3, and then the standard SPC zone. So the zoning ordinance stipulates that the regulations of each zone would apply in each location. So for example, the SPC zone allows up to 100% lot coverage, the R3 only 50%, so a future project here would need to meet both of those standards. This is a condition that exists in many other cities but doesn't really exist in Albany, so the Planning Commission had concerns about it, asked the applicant to show them, okay, what would this look like in the future? How could a project be built on that flag-shaped lot? And this is what the applicant provided to demonstrate. So here we're looking at this. This is the townhome project on the bottom, and the concept idea for a potential future project. And this could be at a maximum up to 32 one-bedroom units, a 2,800 square foot corner retail space with structured lift parking. So just an idea, but the Planning Commission ultimately did make the recommendation to the council to approve. So in terms of the restaurant parking, currently the restaurant and the adjacent Taco Bell have an informal shared parking agreement that allows them to share parking and access through this driveway. This has been recognized by the city in that the city did approve a variance in 2007 to allow only 7 parking spaces for Taco Bell. The actual number of parking spaces currently for both restaurants is 51. Now, because that agreement has never been recorded, for our purposes here, staff is choosing not to recognize that agreement. Technically, it could go away at any time. So instead, the applicant is requesting a reduction in parking following this lot restriping. So the requirement for the existing restaurant is 29 spaces at 1 per 200 square feet. They are providing 24 spaces as proposed under the plan, and then we have 6 spaces at the Taco Bell site. So the request is to reduce parking by 5 spaces, from 29 to 24. In order to do so, there are stipulations in the code to the Planning Commission requiring a survey and analysis of parking space availability. So the next 2 slides summarize an on-street and off-street parking survey. The on-street was conducted in December, Thursday and Friday, lunchtime and evening hours, and staff found 50% occupancy on a Thursday, 77% occupancy on a Friday, which is generally seen as acceptable levels of parking availability. The off-street parking survey, so meaning the actual lot serving the restaurant, you can see the occupancy levels here, up to 78% at lunchtime on a Friday, dinner time 71%, 71% again on a Monday evening. So generally parking available. Just some notable conditions of approval. We have an outside reviewer, engineering reviewer, that's reviewed the tentative map, the condo map, and made some requests for modifications. So that is recommended as a condition of approval. I mentioned the lot line adjustment, which is an administrative action. The affordable housing agreement we had in there as a condition of approval, really as a tracking mechanism and to work out any final details, but you do see that in your packet tonight. And then lastly, a construction management plan to deal with issues of parking during construction, traffic management, things like that. Just a few details on the affordable housing agreement. It includes a requirement for a marketing program, which would include marketing to households that live or work in Albany. And then I did want to note, it talks about a recurring 45-year terms. The actual code for the inclusionary requirement in the city talks about permanently restricted and affordable, but the recommendation of the agreement the city attorney has prepared recommends this recurring 45-year terms. We did receive one comment letter, which includes references to general plan policies with emphasis on context and density. The letter also talks about definitions for front yards and setbacks within daylight planes. So I did want to respond from those. The letter makes reference to the code section regarding daylight planes, and I just wanted to add that that code section does include excuse me, does include a graphic, which is a little bit easier to understand. In our case, we have a 35-foot height limit and then a daylight plane requirement within 15 feet of the required setback. In this case, the applicant has requested a waiver of 15 feet, excuse me, of 5 feet to reduce that daylight plane. In terms of definitions, we have a corner lot here. The code defines corner lot as the smaller dimension of the lot, which is why we have Portland identified. There is a potential inconsistency in the code in terms of a general front yard. The code says that this is determined by the community development director. Because we have this specific definition for a corner lot, we have continued to identify Portland as the front yard and Kains as the side yard. And then just to wrap up, acknowledging that the City Council's strategic plan identifies goals and objectives to promote housing availability and implement the housing element. This is a housing element site. The entire site has a realistic capacity of 18 units, and with 9 units proposed on just about a third of the site, that meets the realistic capacity. This project is covered by the Housing Accountability Act. It meets objective standards as modified by the waivers and concessions under state density bonus law. And so in order to deny or reduce the density or make feasible the project, the council would have to identify specific adverse impacts to public health and safety. So again, the staff recommendation is to review the project and draft conditions and adopt Resolution 2020-17 approving the project entitlements. Excuse me. That concludes my presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Questions from the council members? Yes, Councilmember Barnes.
Just briefly, can we go back to the slide about the 5-foot variance on the front of the buildings where the and there was a diagram about the daylight plane and the 5 feet was mentioned. Explain that a little more, please.
Sure. And so just to be clear, this is not a variance. This is a request under state density bonus law to reduce for a waiver to reduce the daylight plane from 15 feet to, let me just make sure I get this right, from 15 feet to 10 feet. So let me see, I think I have a graphic that shows it. Excuse me. I don't have a good slide, but essentially, in order to add the 9th unit, if we look at the project plans, this will be a little bit easier. On page A0.2. On A0.2, there's a diagram showing what this project looks like when it meets all of the code requirements for 8 units and what it looks like with a 9-unit development. And basically that 9th unit is pushing into the setback such that the daylight plane needs to be reduced by 5 feet in order to fit that 9th unit. The intention behind the daylight plane is to reduce the height next to adjacent lower density uses or lower height uses. So we've got a 38-foot height limit in the SPC zone, a 35-foot height limit in the R3 zone. So conceivably you would have a step down between those two zones. Sorry, we're a little slow.
What's the page number?
It's A0.2.
Along the whole front of the project complex, it's just on the 9th unit on the north side of the project.
On the south side of the project, so it's, well, on both sides of the project. It's on Portland. That would be on Portland, and on the internal, well, really on Portland. That's the front lot, so the front yard, excuse me.
What's the problem there?
It's not really a problem because you're crossing the street to the adjacent neighbor. So it would be, daylight plane could be more impactful if, oh, here we go. Oops.
It's not like you're shading someone else's house, correct?
I don't have shadow information, but that street across Portland, it seems unlikely that you're shadowing the development to the south.
So you can't shadow a street to the south.
Right, right, so it's unlikely. So here, okay, I'm skipping around. Okay, so on the left side of the page, this is a fully compliant project. You have this 15-foot setback, and the daylight plane, which happens to match the roof line, meets up here. In this case, we have, the applicant has requested a waiver to reduce that front yard, and that has shifted they're not meeting that angled daylight plane. So they're requesting this 5-foot waiver.
That's fine,
So
thank
a
you.
little more shade in the street.
No shade on the street, but more shade on the north side. Correct.
No, I think it's the
No?
south side. It's the Portland side.
I guess conceivably a little more shade on the south side. Yep. Because we've pushed this.
You were correct. It's the street side. It's the street.
Right.
Does that make sense, Councilmember Barnes? Are you still thinking about it? Should we take?
The southern northern hemisphere is always in the southern quadrant of the sky, so it's not going to shade anything.
I'm thinking it's less an
True.
issue of the daylight plane, more that they've also reduced the front yard setback. So this, if you can see this line here, this would be the 15-foot setback. They requested a reduction in that, so the whole building, if you think of the whole structure, has shifted over. And so we're not meeting that daylight plane because now the whole building has shifted.
In other words,
Make it seem-
it's objectionable because it pushes the project closer to Portland Street. It might have a little more crowded appearance as you're driving. The project on Portland Street?
I can't say that. All I'm saying is that it doesn't meet the requirement of the daylight plane, and therefore the applicant has requested a waiver.
Yeah.
And we're presumably going to approve that waiver if the density goes.
Right, and so the staff recommendation to approve that waiver is that without approving it, you would be physically precluding the construction of that 9th unit. So somehow they have to, in order to fit that 9th unit on the site, they're not meeting the setback and not meeting the daylight plane.
I think I misspoke when I talked about shade. As you pointed out, it wouldn't be a shade issue.
Yeah, well, I think I can live with this. It's not like I've driven by there on Portland Street probably 1,000 times. I don't think it's an issue for me as a.
Sure. Let's stay on questions for now. Councilmember Moss.
Yeah, I have a question about the affordable unit agreement. So just to get it straight in my mind, so it only, the only time that the applicant's eligibility is checked is when they buy the property, or if they rent it out, the potential tenant has to meet the requirement, or when it's sold, whoever they sell to would meet the requirement. But there's no yearly or any check during the span of time that somebody would own it, that if their income were to go up, there's no way of telling, or?
Yes, I think so. So it is deed restricted. So if it's resold, they have to meet the income eligibility, and they cannot rent it. Anything else?
Yeah. And when that's initially looked at, whose income is being looked at? Is it just the purchaser, or is it going to be all the people that are living in the unit, or, if it's a couple that one is working and later one, I don't know. I'm just
It would be the purchaser, so if it was, you know, if it was a couple who purchased it, it would be that.
It would be their joint income tax that would have to be looked at.
And it's not looked at annually, is that right? Right.
Okay,
Just
and
the first
if
time.
it's one person that, say, a single person bought it, and then later got married to somebody who had quite an income, would anything pop up as to call that into question?
No, I don't believe it does. It doesn't prohibit that situation.
Okay.
If I may help elaborate a little bit on Councilmember Moss's question, the other example of an inclusionary owner-occupied housing units that we have in Albany is at 727 San Pablo, and there we have 4 units. Anytime there's a transaction involving that unit, there's a recorded document, and we do have an opportunity to review that. We do periodically, every few years, request that the owners send us their tax returns to confirm their eligibility, their continued eligibility. And we haven't had to deal with it yet, but theoretically it's possible someone qualified to purchase the property, but then some years later was to be no longer eligible. We'd have to work through the terms of the agreement to either have them contribute to an affordable housing fund or maybe sell the property or
So is that condition in this agreement, or this is just something you've been doing formally?
That condition is in the form of the agreement that we used for 727 San Pablo. I'm personally not as familiar with this particular agreement, this form of agreement, but it's pretty standard practice within the.
So the city would be checking periodically
Yes.
As to how eligible the tenants were, or the owners were to have that unit? Okay.
The eligibility, right, yes, for the owners.
There's many affordable condominiums all throughout the Bay Area. I mean, we're not really reinventing the wheel here, are we? I mean,
No.
this has got to be governed somewhat by state law, because it's state density bonus law is state law.
The inclusionary agreements are driven by the city's municipal code primarily, which is more stringent than the density bonus, state density bonus.
We have 15% inclusionary requirement. But it's the standards for review of, income increases, that's strictly a city-level municipal code rule?
I believe so. I don't think there's anything in density bonus law about monitoring. Someone can correct me if I'm wrong about that, but I don't recall that.
It looks like staff was reviewing the agreement and trying to find out more clarification about that, or?
One thing I did want to clarify, there is a provision to allow for rental for a short-term period if the city approves it, but the point is to keep the owner in as the owner's principal place of residence.
Right.
And the reason to allow for rental is some sort of substantial hardship, but it would have to get approved by the city in advance.
Okay. But we're not certain at this point if the agreement here is the same as the agreement that you cited in the other project.
It's a new updated form that I'm just personally not familiar with. The form that we used at 727 San Pablo was 15 years ago or something.
Okay. Well, if there's any more clarification you can offer us, staff, that'd be great. Okay, thank you, Jeff. Vice Mayor McQuaid?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm still a little confused about the difference between the Greenpoint checklist and the California Green Building Code. And can you clarify which one is this? And because when I looked at the checklist, out of 404 points, they got 130, or 130, which didn't seem great. So I'm just still confused about how that works.
So the California Building Code is building code requirements that the project would have to meet for construction. The city requires submittal of a Greenpoint checklist, but doesn't have a stipulation about the number of points that needs to be met. I can't speak to why they're only achieving a certain number of points. Maybe we can have the applicant explain that in their presentation.
Okay.
And Councilmember Nason, did you have any questions?
No.
Okay. And I'm sorry, did the applicant wish to come up and do a presentation as well? Or- Thank you.
Good evening, Mayor and Council members. I am Lisa Vilhauer with Brana Development. I just wanted to first off thank staff for their hard work on this project, as well as a very thorough presentation. We wanted to quickly introduce Brana Development and Lockhouse investors. We are the developers. It is a partnership. Brana Development has been developing and building in the Bay Area for over 100 years. Currently, we have one building under construction of 32 condos in El Cerrito. We have an 83-unit apartment project under construction in Oakland, and we just finished a 47-unit apartment complex in Oakland as well. Lockhouse Retail Group is the team behind the University Village with the Sprouts in Albany, as well as the Sprouts development in Oakland. We're very excited about this project, very excited to be in Albany and be able to develop and build here. I'm going to turn it over to David Trachtenberg with Trachtenberg Architects to talk through any of the building details.
Thank you, Lisa. I'm David Trachtenberg, Trachtenberg Architects. I'm here with Eric Tam, my associate. I'm not going to walk you through the plans because Jean did a wonderful job on that. The thing I'd just like to point out is that we could have designed a lot more units on this site. We could have done a more traditional apartment project if the developers chose to. We opted instead to do something which we felt was a better fit for Albany, which was 3-story ground-to-sky townhouses. It's a kind of unusual typology for housing in the Bay Area, but it's ubiquitous throughout the rest of the world, the row house and, throughout the world. So we think it's a very good fit for this community. The yield is a bit less, so the couple things I'd point out is that in response to the Planning Commission, we did make a few minor changes. We changed the garage, the ground floor plan such that we can get lots of bicycles and cargo bikes in, which was a request. And was there something else, Eric? I think there are very minor requests made of us, and I think we hit those. Street trees. So I think we alternated the decks on the top floor, which was a great suggestion that was made here. But beyond that, I think the project has been pretty steady. So I'm just here to answer any questions if you have any.
And I understand it is an all-electric project?
I don't think that's determined yet. Is that true, Lisa? It's an all-electric project, indeed.
Very nice. Questions? Councilmember Barnes.
How did you decide on 9? I see 2 maps up there, one with 9 units and one with 8 units. So
Well, the base project yields 8 townhouses. But almost basically every project that we do, and we do a lot of housing projects all over the Bay Area, invokes the state density bonus. There's basically no project that we do that doesn't invoke that in order to get a little bit more density and get the affordable unit. So the only way to get that 9th unit on here was to reduce the front and rear setbacks a bit.
what's the square footage of each unit? Just ballpark, you don't have to.
1,600? Yeah.
That includes the garage?
Yeah, includes the ground floor.
No,
Doesn't
not
include
including the
ground
garage. So almost 2,000, including the garage.
Okay.
Okay, now, given I've just retired, here's my final question is, on projects like this, how do you accommodate seniors in their declining mobility?
Well, the project, you need 9 families to live in this thing. It may not be for everybody, but it doesn't have to be. There's other product that is probably more suitable for people who have mobility issues than this one.
Is there any possibility of ever putting in, I have seen in Albany, seniors putting in these small jack screw
Yeah, I suppose that could be possible. I suppose to retrofit a chair lift. I think an elevator might be challenging given how tight these are, but I think chair lifts, people do those.
On the staircase?
Yeah. I mean, they're straight run stairs, so that could probably work.
Okay, I'm good, thank you.
Okay, thanks. Ann, was the clock meant to be on, or is that a mistake? Oh.
5-minute timer for the applicant.
Oh, okay, very good. Well, we're asking questions, so any further questions?
I'd say open it up.
Okay. I think we're ready to open it up for public comment. Thank you very much for your presentation. Okay. How many people are going to speak on this item? I see around 6 perhaps. Okay. We'll keep it at a 3-minute comment period, but I would ask you that if your comments are very similar to some of the comments that made by the person before you, that you just don't reiterate those comments, but just say that you agree with those comments in order to speed the meeting along. And we have some speaker cards? Okay.
Go ahead.
All right, come on up and hand in your speaker cards, and whoever comes up first, go ahead and start speaking.
Mayor and council members, thank you for the opportunity to speak. My name is Dwight. This is my wife, Vicki. We are living in 711 Kains Avenue. It's about 2 houses down from the corner where the development is. And we've been there about 22 years. We've raised children, and we have friends and families in the area. So we'll be directly impacted by the neighborhood and the parking and everything else. And actually, get to the bottom point, we fully support this project. We've been following this project for over a year now. We've been coming to the council meeting, and we've seen how the architects have, and the city council has been very thoughtful in creating a project that's good for the neighborhood and, following all the rules and everything. I don't understand, but I noticed a lot of thought put into this. I really appreciate that. And one thing is that, that corner where the project's going to be, it's kind of a blighted area in our neighborhood the whole time. Every week, there's people dumping garbage, mattresses, whatever you can think of, they dump it there. Lately, the past year I've been watching, I've seen some out-of-state plates dumping there, so I don't know where it's getting around. And at night, you see people loitering there. I don't know, I don't want to go there, but sometimes maybe they're engaging in some activities that's not safe for the neighborhood, especially if there's family with children there. So we looked at this project, we looked at design, we travel the world, we're really excited about this row house concept. And, we just think that, we see how you guys have been working on it. We really hope, we waited a long time for this to come by. We hate for it to go away for some reason. And we really hope you approve this project, because it really will improve the neighborhood. And, and I've seen you guys worry about the trees and everything, so you're giving a lot of thought to this. So,
and hopefully my son can buy one too, so. Because he could live closer to us and take care of the grandchildren, so. Thank you.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next speaker, please.
Can you put up A3.5, sheet A3.5 on this? Good evening, I'm Ed Fields. I'm not opposed to this project, but I do have a main concern, so I'm going to skip everything I wrote. It doesn't matter what you call the front or the back. We revised the zoning code, and that's why there's an inconsistency, and it wasn't supposed to be the short side that was the front. But my concern is the daylight plane on Kains Avenue, okay? And if you look at the section of code that I put in my letter, which Ms. Eisberg was kind enough to reproduce up there, it talks about exterior property lines. It's a property line on the edge of Kains, a daylight plane on the edge of Kains that affects people across the street who live in lower density housing. They don't live in R3, they live in R2. And there should be a daylight plane. See, here, you're not going straight up to 35 feet, but you are here. And you're only 9 feet back, and they should be 15 feet back if that were the front. But we're not going to argue about that because they can't be 15 feet back. They couldn't build the project, right? But they should have a daylight plane here where this goes straight up to 35 feet, and it's actually less than 9 feet because the gable roof hangs over. This should be sloped back as a daylight plane. That's what the general plan talks about. It's what that zoning code section talks about. The zoning code section doesn't say front yard. So if they had a hip roof here, because there is sun coming from the west in the afternoon, right? That's the sun coming from the west that isn't going to be seen here because this goes straight up to 35 feet. So that's the daylight plane that I'm talking about. They didn't ask for a waiver of that. They could do it. We could argue if it's the front or the side and whether it matters or not, but they should do it. It isn't hard to do it. It isn't taking rooms away. It isn't reducing the density. You have the right to refuse to grant waivers. I'm not saying you should refuse to grant any of the waivers they've asked for, but you can if they don't reduce the density of the project. That's the state law. So it's not that they can have absolutely anything they want. There's nothing that says they have to be entitled to build 1,955 units. It's nice that they are, 3 bedrooms, 3 baths, family housing. That's great. But I do urge you to talk about that daylight plane. I think that was the main thing that I was going to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Clay Larson, Albany resident. Ed is correct, and I believe the consultant referred to the intervening street as perhaps assuaging this situation. But if you look at the language, it refers to districts abutting, and in the definition in the ordinance, abutting includes properties across the street. But I wanted to talk about the impact of this project on parking. And first I wanted to talk briefly about our municipal code, because I don't think the staff and the council and the various commissions recognize it. That parking is described in section 2028. Section 2028-10 describes the purpose of off-street parking, and it reads, the regulations are intended to ensure that the existing inventory of parking spaces serving commercial districts is not diminished by new uses or new construction. So currently there are 45 parking spaces there. That's the existing inventory. That's what we have to preserve under the regulations. I mean, that's what the regulations say. We can, you can choose to ignore them. I don't think that's a good policy. And then section 2840 describes procedures for granting exceptions. And it states that it's a very lofty language. It's the city's intent that all off-street parking requirements shall be observed to the maximum extent feasible. That never happens, but they're strong words, and I think they should have some meaning. And obviously the zoning ordinance recognizes the importance of parking to Albany residents. Against this backdrop, I would ask this council, call the council's attention to a policy in the general plan. Now, the general plan, you may not know this, but it's a document that's supposed to inform or guide our development. So policy T52, it's titled Kains and Adams Access, it states that the city will, quoting again, will ensure that the development along San Pablo Avenue corridor is designed to minimize adverse traffic, parking, and circulation impacts on Kains and Adams Avenue. Clearly a reduction in the parking requirement on this San Pablo corridor restaurant, and the reduction is 21 spaces, given the previous definition, not 5 spaces, the staff parades about here. It's clear that that'll have parking impacts on Kains. I attended all the previous meetings on the Planning and Zoning Committee. I never heard land use policy T5 or traffic policy T52 ever discussed. I think you should discuss it tonight. But more generally, when you get through approving this project, I think the council should think about changing the regulations, specifically with reference to parking. If you're not going to follow a law, why don't we change the law? You're a legislative body, you can do that. Thanks.
Thank you. Is there a next speaker? Please.
Good evening. I'm Michael Cabanatuan. I live at 639 Kains, so immediately across from the project, probably about 5 or 6 of those roof lines in. Sometimes people oppose new developments because of what will be lost. Frankly, there's little, if anything, to worry about being lost on the other side of Kains. There's a really ugly, sort of white, concrete block wall. The only reason it's sort of white is that I usually go out there probably a couple times a month and paint over graffiti. There's also trash dumped almost nightly. Mostly it's garbage dumped from Taco Bell. I also kind of refer to it as the Goodwill dumping ground. People who try to bring their mattresses and things to Goodwill, they won't take them, they dump them there. I've caught people at 2 or 3 in the morning dumping stuff. There have been people living in cars on occasion. I believe there's one there currently, and it's just a general mess. The townhouses will be a big improvement over the wall. I could argue over details, and I think my neighbor Ed brought up a good point. Could they be shorter? Could there be a deeper setback? Not as many entrances or driveways? Of course. It's not a perfect project, but it's good. It will provide needed housing and housing for families, something that doesn't happen a lot in Albany right now. It will remove an eyesore, and it will complete our block. Yeah, I'm a little concerned about parking. Parking is really pretty easy now. Anyone who wants to can pretty much park in front of their house or a couple of spaces away, and even though everyone thinks they have the right to that space, that's not the way it works. It'll be tighter, but I think it's better to house people than cars. I also think that it's better than what could be there. I'd hate to see a huge 4, 5, 6-story block building that would take up the entire block. I think it's better to have the townhouses there. They're attractive. I've seen them in other cities, and I look forward to having something other than the ugly wall across the street. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Hi, I'm Jonathan Carniotti. I own a duplex right across, probably 5, looks like it's going to be 5 roof lines in, right in the middle of the project. It looks great. I think it looks fine. Are there going to be conditions on as far as a condition to the approval of the project that the developers include in the governing documents that there's minimal owner occupancy at the development, meaning that I'm a real estate broker too, and I know that there are some community developments in Hayward and some other places without minimal thresholds of owner occupancy, and they get run down. Like there's no active voting, or there's very, I guess, inactive HOAs that don't take care of the buildings, and it looks terrible. So I don't know. There's most community developments have minimal, I guess, owner occupancy. So can someone answer that?
Sure, after we go through public comment.
Oh, sure, okay.
Staff.
And then I think just, I think it looks great. It looks like I do have one, we have a duplex, it's right across the street, and we have one tenant, and she just asked me to come here, and I wanted to honor her. She said that she's not happy with this project. It looks like also from the photos that we're going to be losing more parking spaces too with the driveways. Is that true? Or,
I believe it is. I'll ask that at the end as well.
And that's just something that I wanted to voice, but that's about it. So thank you.
You're talking about street parking spaces?
Yes.
Yeah, thank you. Next speaker.
Hello, I'm Kirk Schumacher. I own some property in Albany, but not really close to this project. But my concern is also about parking issues. I know that there was a discussion about there being 51 parking spaces for the Taco Bell and the adjacent restaurant, and they are allegedly shared. I was at Taco Bell for dinner just before coming here this evening, and that parking space specifically says it's not for Taco Bell, except for those 6 that are next to the Taco Bell restaurant itself. And we had some figures up here about the percentage occupancy of the parking lot. And my question is that a percentage of what will be the available parking spaces or what is current parking spaces? Because if it was 71% of 51 parking spaces, when you take it down to 24, that's 120% or something, which is going to be very difficult to do. As it was this evening, I had to pull back out of the parking lot, park across the street on San Pablo in front of the Ford dealership in order to find a place to park. And as the previous speaker said, it looks as though there's not going to be any parking space long enough for a car from one end of this project to the other. So I just think that's something that needs to be thought about, particularly because there's only one parking spot in the garage for a 3-bedroom unit, and I think it's pretty unlikely that you're going to have a family there that only has one car. That seems to be pretty rare these days. So those seem like things that need to be considered. I'm not saying this isn't a beautiful project and it's not progress over what's there, but you need to think about, I think, the ongoing and worsening problem of parking in the streets in Albany, because I've been here, a property owner in Albany since 1972. It used to be you could drive along the streets, and now you're always dodging in and out of places where there's a driveway so the oncoming car can get past, and it's getting more and more severe by the month. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other speakers? Seeing none, I'll bring it back to Counsel for discussion, and I neglected to ask my questions at the beginning, so let me ask a few now, and then I'd like to ask some questions to address the comments of the speakers. You stated, Ms. Eisberg, that the Traffic and Safety Commission requested that you bring to the council more information about the parking reduction. Did I get that right?
Yes, the Planning Commission requested that.
Planning Commission requested that. And which part of the presentation was the more information?
That was the 2 slides on the on-street parking survey. Well, they had seen the on-street parking survey. They wanted to include the analysis of the off-street parking survey, so the parking spaces within the project.
Okay, great. And while we're on parking, I understand from the staff reports that we'll be losing 4 or 5 on-street parking places as a result of this project?
Our estimate is 5. We're losing 5 on-street spaces.
5 on-street spaces. Now, with regard to the reduction of 5 spaces for the existing restaurant, I believe that figure was a reduction of 5 spaces, or it's not a waiver, but it's 5 spaces. They're requesting 5 spaces less than they would normally be required by code. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And, okay. Why did the staff say that the permanently affordable condition was not preferred?
The concern that we have, and we're happy to look into this, is if that we make it permanent, that the purchaser will not be able to get financing. So we don't want to create that problem.
Okay. Is that something standard you've encountered in other cities and other projects like this?
We have used this 45-year ongoing provision in other cities. So what would happen, I mean, there is a risk if, for instance, someone purchases the property at age 30 and then stays into the unit until age 75. Obviously, we would use the unit at that case. But if they sold the unit before the 45-year period ends, it would renew to a new 45-year period from the new purchaser.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
If the council does want us to look into that, we can double check that we don't create the inadvertent problem, as we mentioned about the financing, so that it becomes a problem where someone can't finance the unit and get into it.
Okay. Thank you. And then addressing some speaker comments, minimal owner occupancy, is that something that we address or do in Albany? Does staff have any knowledge of that, or?
I'll be quite candid with the council. That's actually not a term I had heard prior to public comment. So the answer is no, we don't do that.
Okay. It sounded like that might be something that...
It sounds like that's maybe a practice in other cities, but it's not a practice that we have here.
To prevent too much renting. Okay. All right. Thank you. Apparently we don't have code for that here. It does sound like our municipal code does have strong language about the loss of off-street parking, or on-street parking in the commercial zone. Is that correct, staff? Or maybe you don't have the code in front of you. I'll just say if you don't have the code in front of you and can't speak to that, I would say if it does, then we might want to consider that, because it seems like our general plan and maybe our specific plan for San Pablo are going to be going in a different direction than that. So I think that's something to look at. Yes.
Within the general plan, there is just a policy statement on the transportation element that pertains to Kains and Adams access, which requires, it says, ensure that development along the San Pablo Avenue corridor is designed to minimize adverse impacts to traffic, parking, and circulation impacts on Kains and Adams Street. So it's just kind of a general statement. There isn't anything that specifically discourages the loss of on-street parking as part of that policy.
Okay, I heard the speaker reference 202810 of the municipal code, and I think that might be what's referring to the loss of on-street parking.
Okay, I can
take
a seat and get back to you.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. I understand. Might not have that right in front of you. So that would be good to know. Again, I think we'd need to revisit that. And finally, daylight plane. The one speaker talked about the daylight plane on Kains, are there daylight plane requirements in code for that eastern-facing portion of the project?
So yes, I think that the public commenter is correct, and the applicant alluded to the fact that the original project had the decks all along the front, which was part of how they met the daylight plane at Kains. So if you can imagine if this deck continued along the Kains frontage. So the applicant did make that change to respond to the commission's request, and it is, we had them model the Portland request because we knew that, didn't have them model the Kains side with that change. So I can't say that it does still meet that daylight plane, but in any case, the waiver has been requested for Portland Avenue, the same waiver. There's an unlimited number of waivers. The same waiver could be requested for the Kains side.
Okay, but it has not yet been requested. Okay. So.
I could look at the specific resolution. No.
Okay, thank you. All right, I think that addresses my questions and the speakers. Fellow council members.
I think Ann has something.
Oh.
Wanted to just follow up on your earlier question related to inventory of parking spaces which serve commercial uses. So the provision in question is in the purpose section of parking. It says, ensure that the existing inventory of parking spaces serving commercial districts is not diminished by new uses and construction. It's a policy statement, but certainly through a discretionary review, you have the discretion to interpret as you see appropriate based on the project that's before you.
Absolutely, yes, we have that discretion, but we might want to consider changes, as I mentioned, in the future so that our code more closely mirrors our practice. Councilmember Nason, do you have any comments?
Not at this time, no.
Okay, Vice Mayor?
Yeah, the only comment that I'd like to make is to thank all of the speakers that came. Sitting up here, every time there's, in my experience, every time there's a project, what we hear is always no, 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 no. And to hear everybody say this is a good project, we like this, there were some modifications made, but it was so nice to hear, yes, let's do this. It's the first time I've ever heard it. Thank you.
It's true.
Councilmember Moss.
Well, yeah, I would also thank the speakers that came and supported this project. I think it's a lovely project. I think it just hits the nail on just many points, and I love the design. I think it's the right kind of housing for Albany going forward, family housing. It takes kind of an eyesore spot and turns it into something really great for the city. Some of the comments, I wanted to say something about the daylight plane. Yes, we could conceivably request that those front gables become hips, and there'd be a minuscule amount more of sunlight that might hit Kains Avenue or across the street. But sometimes these are things where you're balancing good design versus a daylight plane, which I think has its uses, but I think we'd be giving up a lot in the design, and I wouldn't favor that. Parking comes up all the time, and I think it's going to keep coming up more as we try to get denser or build more housing in Albany. It comes up in every city. There's no magic bullet for parking. Cities, you can consider cities are either going to be for people or for cars. And as we get denser and as we have more housing, cars are going to lose. And, at maybe in the 50s or 40s or 30s, when Albany was more of a suburban spot, there would be lots of space on the street, and you could drive up and down. But I think as the future goes on, we're going to have less and less parking. I sound like a broken record because I've said this many a time up here. I think we really have to look at parking permits if we want to preserve neighborhood parking, particularly close to commercial areas, because there's just no way it's going to happen otherwise. So that's my big kind of hit on all this. I must say I particularly like the design, the way you did the interior design. This not only is potential family housing, but when I look at those plans, I see ADUs are quite possible, and I hope the contractor or the developers put in appropriate sized plumbing for future ADUs, because I think there will be a few there.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Barnes.
Yeah, I just want to follow up future ADUs on the possible development in the back, or ADUs in these 5 units?
Oh,
these 9 units.
There will be ADUs. I mean, I don't know, but there could be ADUs in those units. If you look at the plan.
You're talking about like taking the ground floor as an ADU.
Exactly.
I see.
Okay. Yeah, I in general agree with all the positive comments. As sort of a curiosity, I think it's easy to do with modern software. You can even do it in Google Earth now. I'm curious just how much daylight you'd pick up if you did put you'd need 4 hip roofs, only every other one. And there's 35 feet is the height of the roof line, right? I suspect you wouldn't pick up much sunlight, but if it was conceivable to see that, it might be just worth trying to do it. Can we go back to now remember we eliminated Measure D, so the idea that we just have one parking space per unit is totally consistent with what this council had decided to do. So I have no problem with that. Can we go back to, say, the map of the parking, or the sort of the overhead view of the parking? I didn't go the one that goes all the way out and shows the restaurant parking lot. Well, we can go with that one. Many of us on this council have done Blue Glove Crew, the litter pickup thing that Solano Avenue does. I've walked by this spot a lot. That parking lot as it exists now is huge. And I've eaten at that restaurant. I remember the Sizzler years when this was a very popular Sunday brunch place. I don't, recall there being, seeing that parking lot full. So now if we do, the fact in this image, you can see on Kains, though, parked in the southbound direction, because it's a one-way street, there's a bunch of cars parked right there near the corner, and you're going to lose some of those parking spaces, right? Because you'll lose at least 5. Right, but at least 4, because there's double garages. You aren't going to be able to park in front of the double garages or any of the garages. So yes, there's a lack of parking there. And you cited a rule about there being 1 parking for every 200 square feet of a restaurant, is that correct? And so if this design goes through, we would need, by that standard, 29 parking spaces, and we'll only have 24. Is that right? I can live with that. I think that's very reasonable. And then I guess this is a question for Ann. I concur that there's problems with condo projects where you don't have owner occupancy. But I'm just wondering, empirically, has it ever been a problem in Albany? I mean, there's lots of condos on the backside of Albany Hill. Has it ever occurred to staff that we really should have such an ordinance because there's problems with these places getting rented out?
I don't believe that we've ever had any issues or calls or complaints related to that. And I would think typically if that happened, that would be something resolved through the homeowners association and their ability to enforce the condition, covenants, and restrictions with the property owner.
Yeah, so this also must be an issue in the big towers down on Pierce Street.
If it is, it's not a problem that we've encountered in community development. And that's not to say that it isn't. I think it goes through this other process that ultimately has a little more enforcement through the CC&Rs.
Right, and well, I think it's something we should keep an eye on. I do remember, well, it's been 20 years since I looked for a house in Albany, but I looked at some of the condos on the east side, and there was a problem with some of those little condo units because some of the various occupants weren't paying their HOA fees, and it was hard to do maintenance, blah, blah, blah. So if it's not a problem yet, but it conceivably could be a problem in the future. We'll just add that to your list of,
Long list.
So, yeah, I think this is a great idea, so let's move ahead.
Okay. Thank you very much. I just have a few comments. I thank my council members for their comments. I mostly agree with those, and thank you all for coming. Thanks for the comments of the speakers, and in particular, your very careful reading of our code and regulations. I think it's an excellent project. It's a very nice-looking project. It definitely is going to be an improvement for the area. It adds housing, which is really important. We want to meet our housing goals and our housing and do our part for the region. And as far as parking goes, I think the parking surveys have shown that we're not going to have a parking problem. We might be tighter after this project, but we're not going to necessarily have a problem. But I say if we do meet our housing goals and have retail and commercial and business success, such that parking becomes really tight, then we should do what Councilmember Moss was saying, which is we go the way of what cities do to take care of this is parking meters and residential parking permits, and so that the residents can have a guaranteed place to park, and parking meters turn over the spots so anyone looking for a spot can find one. I think that I appreciate the design. I appreciate that that the architect said it's not something that we usually do in Albany, so I really welcome that because I think diversity in housing design is good as well as other sorts of diversity. I really welcome that. So my only concern is that if there's something that's not quite, something that has to be adjusted regarding the daylight plane on Kains, that we take care of that, but otherwise, but it sounds like there's certainly easy ways to take care of that. But other than that, I'm certainly ready to approve this project's. Yeah, go ahead.
Do we need to pre-approve? Can the waiver be issued at the staff level if the determination is that indeed there is some requirement with regard to the daylight plane that needs to be waived?
We would need to revise the resolution to indicate that it's a waiver of the daylight plane on the front and the side setback.
So should we include that in a motion if,
Yeah,
if that's our inclination?
Is this a
Quickly chime in. I don't believe we can double check the code, but on the footnote that applies with the height limit, the daylight plane only applies to the front, which would just be the Portland side.
So yeah, if we can look at that.
Well, how about in any motion we include the direction to staff that we adjust as needed regarding the daylight plane?
Okay.
Okay? The city attorney says that'll be okay. If needed, we adjust.
Okay,
Yep.
so I would move adoption of Resolution 2020.
I think Councilmember Barnes had a question.
Just briefly, I want to address your concern, Councilmember Moss, about the parking restrictions. I'm not so worried about that on the San Pablo corridor because this is mostly, the density of restaurants is relatively low compared to Solano. So that means that at nighttime, since a lot of these are sort of auto garages and whatnot, there's not so much, it's not parked up the way the side streets are near Solano, because Solano has a much higher density of restaurants and evening shops and restaurants that are open in the evening. And the other pitch I want to put in is that this is quite walkable to BART, and it's also very safely walkable for kids to either the middle school or the high school. Not so much, Cornell would be a stretch, but I mean, I think it's very feasible. You could have kids and older kids, and between one car and BART and walking to the middle school and high school, I think you could do just fine. This is not a first reading. This is it, correct?
This is an action item, yes, not an ordinance, so no first reading.
So we're okay on the issue with the approvals and.
Yeah, I think Councilmember Moss is going to address that in his resolution, in his motion.
You know, there's one thing that has occurred to me that I'd like to ask about, and that is the rear entrances to into the bedrooms on the ground floor. Are those convertible to disabled accessibility? If they were to be used like roommates, junior ADUs, whatever they might be, the ground floor, bedroom, bathroom combos, they have separate entrances, correct, through the back?
Yeah, but
I think
you wouldn't be able to access the streets.
Break a hole in the wall, I think.
There wouldn't be any, so access has to be through the front or side?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, through the garage.
Mm-hmm.
Open up the garage door and roll up the ramp.
Then you still got to get up the interior stairs, however.
Yeah, I missed the
but
wall.
to that,
Yeah.
you're talking about the potential ADU on the ground
If there
floor.
could be a, yeah.
Yeah, you could.
Okay, that's all right. Thank you.
Okay, back to my movement here. Move adoption of Resolution 2020-17 with the conditions that we talked about, the daylight plane, if there needs to be some better resolution in that.
I'll second.
Okay. Is that good enough motion to cover that?
Yeah.
Okay. We have a motion and a second. Can you call the roll?
Councilmember Barnes?
Yes.
Councilmember Moss?
Yes.
Councilmember Nason?
Yes.
Vice Mayor McQuaid?
Yes.
Mayor Pilch?
Yes, and that carries, and thank you everyone for coming, and we look forward to this project.
We've approved housing.
Yay.
Yay. We don't do that often.
Yay, housing. All right.
This one.
So on to item 10.2. Proposed repeal and replacement of Chapter 2032, signs of Albany Memorial, which is a sign code of the Albany Muni Code. First reading. And the planning and zoning recommendation is that the council introduces for the first reading ordinance 2020-1, repealing and replacing Chapter 2032 signs of the Albany Muni Code. So I didn't notice this at first, but the Planning and Zoning Commission adopted 2 resolutions to initiate code amendments to the sign portion of the code and, oh, I'm sorry. Can you explain that? Yeah,
Sure, of
go ahead.
course.
Staff report.
I'll give you the staff report and get into the specifics of that. So we are back before you this evening with revisions to the draft sign ordinance. We presented that to you on December 2nd, at which time it was officially continued to a date certain, but we took the time to actually do some additional review, particularly with new legal counsel, to make sure that everything was as it should be and consistent with requirements of federal law. So one kind of big picture preamble I want to give to the council about sign ordinances in general is that there is no model sign ordinance. They're really difficult to prepare as the regulations are rooted in constitutional law. And generally speaking, there's case law which typically determines how signage can be regulated and also comply with the First Amendment. So right now, jurisdictions are limited in how we regulate signage, and that's we can regulate time and manner, and we have to have content neutrality. Our current ordinance lacks that. So for your review this evening, we have the revisions to the draft sign ordinance, which I'll present. We ask that you open it up for public comment. We are seeking specific direction on time durations for temporary non-commercial signage, and we would have your direction reflected in the draft for the second ordinance. That was a topic in our December review that didn't quite get ironed out. There were sort of competing opinions, and so that's one thing we really want to get clarified this evening. And we have, as you've seen, the draft ordinance 2020-01, which is a repeal and replacement of the signs chapter. So just to refresh your memory, our current sign ordinance was established in 1978, and it lacks any language on content neutrality as well as distinctions between commercial and non-commercial signage. When the zoning update was completed in 2004, this was a section of the code that was not included as part of that scope. So this ordinance has been untouched for many, many years. Because of that and because of federal case law, it was the city attorney's direction that we repeal and replace the entire ordinance. In 2015, the Supreme Court issued a ruling in the case of Reed v. Town of Gilbert, Arizona, which concluded that local jurisdictions may not create different rules for signage based on content. What this means is that the ruling requires strict content neutrality, provisions for on-site and off-site signage, as well as commercial and non-commercial distinctions. We've included the ruling as an attachment to your staff report. So what this means, what a city can do, we may regulate time, place, manner, and development standards by zoning district. What we cannot do is treat signs differently based on their content, and we are also not in a position to regulate the actual content of sign. So within the initial draft, you'll see we have purpose, new definitions, valuation standards, general regulations, message neutrality, as well as temporary commercial signs and temporary non-commercial signs. We also have designated authority for review, sign area requirements by zoning district, as well as the requirements by sign type, and then a requirement for a master sign program. So this is an example of one of the definitions, as well as a corresponding graphic to visually communicate the signage example to someone who might come into the counter, let's say, and they're opening a business and they have their heart set on a particular sign. We can kind of walk them through it as to the different signage types based on the zoning district where their business is located. So from the previous draft, compared to what's before you tonight, we've eliminated two definitions, public property and election period. We also eliminated references to sign display during election periods. That's completely gone. We've clarified some language regarding the exempt sign definition. We've also included temporary non-commercial signs in section 2032-055. So we previously had two sections. We've folded that into one. We have included a clarifying statement on allowable sign area by zoning district. And per the council direction, we've included a definition for yard sign and noted that that is within the temporary commercial sign and put it in the table as permit exempt. And so we've also noted that temporary non-commercial signs are permitted in all zoning districts. What we are really seeking clarity on, though, is whether or not to proceed with a time restriction on temporary signage or allow it without any time restriction. And at the last council meeting, there was a lot of discussion on that. And so our hope is that with your input tonight, we can get clarity. The 90-day recommendation is based on the review of our legal counsel if the council decides to go with a time restriction. If you prefer to not have a time restriction, that's a fairly straightforward fix for us, and we can eliminate any reference to time restrictions for temporary non-commercial signage in the residential districts. With respect to A-frames, we do not address the A-frame signage or establish a restriction or prohibition. It would be our intent that if this was something to be pursued, it would require collaboration and engagement with the business community as well as council direction on a potential outcome.
These are temporary signs, right?
Those are the signs you might see during the day as you walk on Solano or San Pablo. With respect to this effort, it does implement a general plan policy, LU 6.5 signage, which requires or encourages the treatment of commercial signage as an integral part of building design and an opportunity to enhance the visual character of the city. The corresponding action item is to update the sign ordinance as we have before you this evening. And this was also most recently included in the council's strategic plan where you have identified an objective to maintain an attractive atmosphere in the business district, and specifically correlated to that is updating the sign ordinance. We have not received any correspondence in response to this latest ordinance. The code amendments are exempt from CEQA. And to Mayor Pilch's point early on, this went to commission twice. So in our zoning code, we have a two-step process to amend the code. The first is to adopt a resolution of intention, which sets the intention of the commission to initiate efforts to amend the code and also ultimately make a recommendation to the council. So they looked at this twice before making a formal recommendation, which is Resolution 2019-11, which forwards the recommendation to council to adopt the draft ordinance. So with that, we are looking for clarity on the non-commercial display duration, whether you do 90-day or a no time restriction. We would modify that for the second reading, should you take action this evening.
Okay, thank you very much. Can you clarify, you mentioned a master sign program. What is that exactly?
Typically, you would see a master sign program like University Village is a good example. When they came in for their project entitlements, we worked with them and Planning Commission reviewed this, a master sign program. So it calls out the restrictions on tenant signage, a kind of a cohesive palette and color scheme, that type of thing. So the signs that you see there right now are part of that master sign program. They limit the size and colors and materials.
I see. Okay, thank you. And then for the temporary non-commercial signs and where you want us to think about the time restrictions, that would be things such as political signs for candidates?
It could be campaign signs. It could be signs, that are signs you see in the community, related to science and other sort of social causes, that type of thing.
Yeah, and so I guess one thing that got removed, since we had to remove any reference to elections and such, is any reference to having to remove those signs right after an election is completed.
That's correct.
Yeah, okay. Thank you. Questions from my council members?
I just have one concern about the A-frame signs. There's also, this is an ADA issue as well on sidewalks, so I just want to make sure whatever we do with A-frames, it's consistent with ADA, because we don't want people banging into the A-frame signs as they walk down the street.
Okay. Councilmember Moss, any comments or no? Sorry, questions.
Comments, but no,
questions.
questions.
Oh, you have some comments. Okay. Does anyone from the public wish to speak on this item on signs? Seeing none, let's bring it back to council for discussion. And you had a comment.
The one quick comment I had is if there's a question between, say, a 90-day restriction and a no-time restriction, I think I would prefer the no-time restriction and leave it open.
Okay.
I think that 90-day restriction would be kind of challenging to enforce. I'm not sure who's going to go around and tag signs for dates, and so better to keep it at no time.
Other comments?
I guess I was assuming it would be a complaint-driven enforcement. If somebody had a sign and it became deteriorated and a blight, on the appearance of the block, that a neighbor could call in and say, it's been there way too long.
And then the city could send a letter, something like that?
Yeah. And I think I'd prefer to have something to address signs that stay way too long and become a visual blight.
So all those school care signs that we leave up too long and they get moldy and then they...
Yeah, they should come down eventually. They should be put up in somebody's front window or their car or somewhere where they're not going to, just turn into basically trash.
Okay. Vice Mayor?
I would agree with Councilmember Moss. I think it's too hard to set up something that we know we really are not going to be able to enforce. But I am sensitive to your comments, and I'm trying to think if there's any way that, can you write an expectation into an ordinance? It's the expectation signs will be removed if they become deteriorated, and that kind of gives a little wiggle room for complaint.
Yeah, we do have a provision in the draft that specifically identifies dilapidated signs, and so that would give us the legal authority to write a courtesy letter and that type of thing.
And the other thing I just wanted to touch on briefly are the A-frame signs. I know it's not part of this, and I don't want to include it here, but I would like for staff and for us to consider, maybe with the Economic Development Committee, a program that removes the A-frame signs but puts up some good signage with maybe rolling information about what's happening in town, or, I've seen some in other cities I won't mention because Councilmember Barnes will be mad, but other cities have some really nice ones that take the place of the A-frames and give good information and look really nice, and they're not in the way, so they're certainly not an ADA issue.
Are they? I'm just curious. Are they electronic at all, or are they?
Yeah, they're some kind of electronic.
Okay.
Are they?
They're doing those in Berkeley, I think.
Oh, okay.
The B word. Okay.
So that or Minneapolis.
Lose his support before we started. Anyway, it's not something we have to do tomorrow, but I think it's something that we should be working on.
You might want to talk to Alan Kane of the Solano Avenue Association, because he has lots of ideas about those. Well, if I may, on the...
You may.
If, I'm making an analogy to the 72-hour street parking rule. That is, if someone parks in front of my house for more than 72 hours, and oftentimes it's like months, and you complain to APD, they can come in and see that the car is there, but then that's when the clock starts, and there's another 72 hours before they can cite. Is that correct? So you could have, if that's analogous to the idea of a 90-day sign, there could be dilapidated sign there. Somebody could complain to someone in the city who has a lot of time on their hands, and they're going to come by and go, okay, clock starts, and they're going to come back in 90 days, and if the sign is still there, they're going to make a sign, send a letter or something. I think that process clearly isn't going to work. Realistically, I think the neighbors are going to solve that problem at 2 in the morning, and the sign will just disappear. So, I don't think we need to get involved. But, yeah, the courtesy letter thing, that could be a reasonable solution. And then that's it.
Okay, let me speak to the enforceability a little bit. Yeah, I don't see the city staff spending a lot of time with enforcing a lot of our ordinances and things we have in the books, but I think it's still important, if we think something's going to be a problem, to have an ordinance about it, because you have the ability to enforce that should it become a problem. Say a property becomes blighted, a property is neglected, the owner is not there and is not maintaining the property, then you can use sign ordinances as well as other ordinances to tick off all the complaints against this property and have a stronger case when you have to enforce the whole thing. So I don't always think that it's important to think of enforceability when we put a rule or an ordinance in place, but rather, is that what we want? And if we really had to enforce it because things became really bad, then we could. Could have public works people. We could have, we could have public works people actually physically come and do that. I suppose we'd have to have some sort of police action to enter the property, et cetera. But I just am a little bit allergic to this idea. If we can't enforce it, let's not have a rule, right? I think if you take that to the extreme, then you end up with no rules. So I think we should be careful about that. But that said, in terms of the signs, we do have the rule about the dilapidated. We do have it in the ordinance about the dilapidation of the signs. So it sounds like that addresses some of the council members' issues. I'm hearing kind of 50-50, limit, no limit. Do we want no limit? Do we want to compromise 180 days instead of 90? Or any further comments about that?
Well, I think that signs like school care, Black Lives Matter, those kind of signs, I think, are intended to be up basically indefinitely. And so I would hate to have any time limit on when those type of signs. And since all signs are equal, I support having no time limits.
Okay. And you are no time limit, right?
Yeah, I'm a no time limit. With the idea that if these signs reach some kind of dilapidated eyesore state, they can be dealt with.
That's in there, yeah. And
I'm not sure why the time limit would be.
And Councilmember Nason, you were more for a time limit, I believe.
I'm more for a time limit. I think it could limit a number of foreseeable problems, and it creates a bright line. It's an easy thing to tell whether the sign has been there for 90 days. Different people might have different perspectives on what constitutes a dilapidated sign. We have a Supreme Court decision, and we need to comply with it, but you can certainly run into problems with front yards being, cluttered with statements forever, and I've seen those problems in some places, and I think that a time limit just gives you a very neutral and very clear and easy cutoff, and I like that.
Now, just to complicate things, if the sign is in somebody's window, we have no authority to tell them to take down a dilapidated window sign. Is that correct?
More or less, yeah.
And we have no authority to have people take down those obnoxious Christmas tree lights that they leave up all year round?
We have no authority over Christmas lights.
Yeah, I'm sort of okay with the no time limit.
Okay, so no time limit. And so, I guess I could get to have the deciding vote. Oh, sorry, do we have?
Well, we got to really vote.
We already have 3 no time limits, so I guess that kind of decides that. And do we have, let's see, what is the staff recommendation?
Do you want a motion? Is that?
Yeah, I think you would introduce this for first reading with the specific direction to proceed with no time restriction, and we would come back to you on March 2nd at second reading with those revisions incorporated.
Would you like me to make that motion?
Certainly, yeah.
Okay, I'll move that we introduce for the first reading Ordinance 2020-01, repealing and replacing Chapter 20.32 of the signs of the Albany Municipal Code with the no time limit on the signs. Yes.
You have a second?
I'll second.
Okay.
Councilmember.
Oh, sorry, further discussion, or?
Well, I just want to make sure that Councilmember McQuaid's statement includes temporary non-commercial.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, because that wasn't in your motion originally. But she said it quietly, so.
Okay. I think now we're ready.
All right. Yeah, I'm happy.
Now we're ready for a roll call.
Councilmember Barnes?
Yes.
Councilmember Moss?
Yes.
Councilmember Nason?
Yes.
Vice Mayor McQuaid?
Yes.
Mayor Pilch?
Yes.
And the motion carries.
It does. Okay, thank you very much. Moving on to unfinished business, we have none. New business is the Inclusivity and Diversity Resolution proposed by the Social and Economic Justice Commission. And do we have a staff report or a report from the commission, or both?
I think we have both.
Okay, great.
Yes. So, good evening, council members and Mayor Pilch. I will start with a brief overview of the staff report, and Gregory Downs, the chair of the SEJC, is here tonight to make a presentation on the proposed resolution by the SEJC. So the item before council is an inclusivity and diversity resolution by the SCJC requesting the collection and posting on the city website of employee demographic data and of members of city advisory bodies. Staff is recommending that council provide direction to staff on SCJC's proposed inclusivity and diversity resolution. So the 2019-2021 SEJC work plan includes the development of an annual Albany diversity report card and a survey on inclusivity. And the SEJC has identified the EEO4 report collected by the U.S. Equal Employment Opportunity Commission in odd number years as data available to post on the city website regarding the city's workforce. The SEJC is also requesting that the city begin to collect demographic data of residents who serve on city advisory boards. The city's Human Resources Department currently collects the data for the EEO4 survey. The information is voluntarily completed and collected upon hire for all employees. The data collected for the EEO4 report could be posted on the city website without any personally identifying information. And the city currently does not collect demographic data from advisory body members. Staff consulted with the city attorney regarding this matter, and it has been advised that the city not expand the categories of data beyond those identified in the EEO4 report for data regarding employees or advisory body members, as there is not an identified legal basis for gathering additional data. And the U.S. Equal Employment Opportunity Commission enforces federal laws prohibiting employment discrimination. And the city also has an equal employment opportunity policy to ensure equal employment opportunity for all employees. This commitment includes a mandate to assure equal employment opportunity to all persons, regardless of race, religion, color, creed, national origin, sex, sexual orientation, marital status, age, disability, or genetic information. So that's all I have for now. And if you'd like, Chair Downs can come and make a brief presentation on.
Would you like to? Yes, please.
Thanks so much. I want to thank, my name is Greg Downs. I'm the current chair of the SEJC, and I'm a Albany resident. I want to thank Isabel for her report and for the staff report, and the City Council for considering our request. And I also want to thank the city staff for their responsiveness to our questions. This developed out of questions that originated with a fellow SEJC member, Judy Kerr, who could not be here tonight, but who I believe has submitted a statement in favor of this to staff. And in engagement with staff to sort of discover, what we already have that matches, that already exists, and that matches things that are more widely available in other cities and towns. And I also want to thank our staff for something else that you see here, which is something else that had emerged from the subcommittee that Commissioner Kerr and I are on, which is to ask for inclusions when appropriate of often brief social equity and inclusivity considerations, which you can see here as a beta test. So we appreciate all their help in making those things happen and in helping fulfill the work plan objective to promote community-wide inclusivity. We drew up, Commissioner Kerr and I drew up this resolution in consultation with staff after seeing the ways that similar information is reported in places like Berkeley, no offense, and Sacramento, as well as many other cities, universities, and other entities that report this data. Generally, they report it in order to educate citizens in the case of cities or clients in the case of others, and to resist two problems that fester in the lack of knowledge. So I know that upon, sort of considering it, one of the things that people understandably jump to is the sort of possibility of knowledge creating problems, which is always something worth considering. But we wanted to point toward two things that develop in the absence of knowledge, both of which we think are significant challenges. One of which is a thin complacency that sort of says everything is fine without a need for examination. And the other is its counter, a kind of thin cynicism that frankly I hear often in Albany, that nothing ever changes or improves, especially on these issues. And that both of these fester in the absence of knowledge, that the knowledge of where the city stands empowers citizens to assess both what's working and also what are the areas that they might need to develop better action plans. We were struck in our consultation with staff as well by the fact that the city already collects this data for the EEO. It is included at times in minutes or in agendas of commissions or council so that it's not private information, but despite the fact that it's paid for by the public, it's not easily available to the public, even though it could be done so at minimal trouble. So our resolution aims first to make this data easily available. There are tabs at different city websites that do this, that make it easily available. And second, to ask the council to consider expanding the data collection to applicants for advisory boards and commissions so that it can be used to consider, to assess where the city is succeeding in engaging with the diverse population of Albany and where more work needs to be done. I will say that in this passed unanimously through SEJC last December, I will say that there was one question that surfaced then and that relates to what Isabel mentioned in terms of the staff recommendation. I think that if any of us were starting from scratch, we might well imagine the complexity of identity and the many different categories that we might devise, and I think all of us on SEJC started with that premise. On the other hand, the utility of working within the categories that the EEO works under, even if they're not what I might myself would choose is A, they're already there, and B, they don't run into the types of issues that staff appropriately pointed out could come up if we came up with other categories that, that haven't been pre-approved in this manner. So certainly one could imagine selecting other different identifying characteristics or measures of identity for the purposes after consultation with staff and after figuring out what we already have in EEO and how difficult it would be to backfill this in other ways, that we came to the conclusion that staff reinforced that the EEO categories, while imperfect, would be the best starting and building blocks. So I'm glad to take any questions if there are any, and I appreciate your time.
Councilmember Barnes.
So in regards to commissions, are you talking about pooling the data from all the commissions together, or doing this on a commission by commission basis?
I mean, certainly, we're open to either. My assumption is that the broader the total aggregate pool that you use, the less likely you are to expose anyone to identification, which is, I think, a valid concern. So I think we didn't specify that so that it could be worked out in a way that you all and staff felt appropriate. To me, speaking just personally, it makes sense that we could aggregate the applicants for all commission pools so that people could see that without having some of the understandable concerns that would come up about privacy if you got down to areas where there were 6 applicants for 5 spots on a new commission or something.
Right, and you could toss the council in there too, right? I mean, did you?
One certainly could.
Why not?
So for this EEOC report, is it publicly available now on the website?
No, we are not posting the EOC report on the city website right now. And it's not a report that we file, that we're obligated to file, because we don't have over 100 employees currently working for the city, so we collect the data, but we're not required to file it with the EEO.
So would it be difficult to file or post it on the website?
No. No, it wouldn't be.
So were you going to say something, Nicole?
Well, we do need to clarify the difference between applicants and members for advisory bodies, because that was also a recommendation through the city attorney's office, is that it should be for members versus applicants, because that mirrors the EEO4 report. It's employees versus applicants.
And this would be strictly based on self-identification.
Yes.
Because, my son is mixed race, for example. He could, there's all these issues about, well, do you want to be Asian? Do you want to be white? Is there a mixed race category? And then it comes down to gender at UC Berkeley and, non-gendered pronouns, and it gets kind of messy.
So questions?
But you consider those issues, it sounds like, and you're just willing to go with a straight EEOC existing.
That is correct.
criteria.
We're certainly very sensitive to the issues that you raised, especially as relates to gender. The EEO does include a variety of ways to self-report race. Again, one could imagine how that could be even broader. The self-reporting of gender would be something that would be more starkly different in the EEO standards than ours. But both the concern that staff, voiced clearly about, the challenges of going beyond that, and also the difficulty of backfilling our information that we have, what we report to the EEO. My understanding is, from the last time of collection, and if we were trying to add categories retrospectively, we add the people, staff can clarify if I'm wrong, but we add the information upon the point of hire. So we're not typically surveying current employees to continue updating their information. If I'm wrong, I apologize.
Okay.
Councilmember Nason, you had a question?
No.
Okay. Question? No. No questions. Anyone from the public wish to speak on this item? Seeing none, back here for discussion. Councilmember Nason or Vice Mayor McQuaid?
Do you have anything?
No.
It seems, on the human resources page, there's a statement, the city is an equal opportunity employer, blah, blah, blah. It seems to me we could add that link right there with a minimum of effort, and I'm sorry, I got a little bit confused. We do collect the data, but we don't file it. Is that what you're saying? So it's not an extra step to have to collect it?
No, no.
Okay. That would seem to me to be at least a first step.
Councilmember Moss?
Yeah, I agree with that. You have the data for employees, and we put that on the website. I think that would be a relatively great first step and pretty easy to do. I guess I have some concerns about privacy for volunteers, and I guess ultimately, I don't know that I've thought this out completely, that I feel totally comfortable one way or another, and that's just where I'm on that other aspect of trying to, get commission and committee members to self-identify and then put that out there.
Okay. Councilmember Barnes?
Yeah, just quickly, when it comes to collecting this information for commission members, is that going to be difficult? Will that be something like a check-off procedure when they join a commission, and then we compile that once a year?
Yeah, we'd have to implement a process that would be connected to the selection process. Like once somebody is selected to be on a board, at that point there'd be a survey. We haven't thought that far yet, but that's probably something that would have to be administered separately, and it would have to be kept confidential and be made. So it's definitely a new process that we'd have to implement. So that's I guess the most complicated of these.
Is there some way we could try this out? If it turns out to be a huge headache, we could change our mind?
Well, one thing that occurred to me when you were talking, our advisory bodies tend to rotate, with best intentions, people sign up basically for the 2 years, but things happen and they move on to another commission or they move or whatever. So it would be pretty labor intense for staff, I think, which I hadn't really thought about before, but people are coming and going. And then I'm not sure you're getting the full picture, because if you have, say, 10 people in January of one year, by the time you get to the end of the year, you may have 10 totally different people. So do you have 20 people information, or do you have, I'm not quite sure what, at the end of the day, what we're really looking at.
And for the EEO report, the information is collected every 2 years on odd numbered years. So the intention would be to update the information on the website every 2 years.
So for that information, is it just the current pool of employees, or is it all the employees who have joined during that 2 years?
No, it's the current pool.
Okay.
Who is employed with the city at that time.
So more like a snapshot of that moment at the end of 2 years, and who knows, between the 2 years, it may change a bit.
Yes.
But then another snapshot.
Yeah, and it's usually in September. The point in time when it's collected is in September or by September.
Well, my concern is that usually when and this is a problem when governments collect data, if you start disaggregating down to like small businesses at the county level, they start obscuring the data, because if there's only 2 companies that are in that category, everybody knows who they are. And I hate to say this, but for some ethnic categories, there's so few people in this town or on our commissions, everyone's going to know who they are, and they'll be shopping in Safeway, and someone will say, "Did you know there's only 2 African Americans on all our commissions, and you must be one of them?" And this person might go, "Well, did we really need to reveal that information?" So, I just have mixed feelings, because I think we all know we need more people of color on our commissions, and that will probably be that way for years. So I'm not sure operationally how it's going to change what we do. We just need to keep on encouraging people and seeking people out and getting them plugged into the system. So I guess I have mixed feelings.
Yeah, I do too. I think one concern is we're now going to have to set up a system of protected confidential information that is requested on the applications and then is stored somewhere and protected. And, you do that with that's part of the HR system when you're hiring people. But it's not part of our system now, and I could see whatever resources go into doing that might be better spent on, more advertising for people to apply, because we have more of a problem recruiting people than we do, some huge pool of people who want to sit on these commissions, and then we risk discrimination if we're not careful about looking at these things. So I'm all in favor of putting up the EEOC information on the website if we're compiling it anyway. If it's something like this memo from July that we saw, I see no reason not to post that on the website. It would be in the website somewhere anyway, because it's an SEJC packet, right? So it's just making it a little easier to get to. But this thing of asking applicants for volunteer jobs to provide confidential information about their identity, I'd rather we not go in that direction right now. There's really obvious things that we need to do of just reaching out more to underrepresented communities that I think would be a lot more effective.
I thank the staff and SEJC for working on this. It sounds like there's a consensus, and I completely agree that the EOC data should be published, made public, and it seems non-controversial. I also support the collection and publishing of the aggregate data of the commissions and the council, but I do appreciate my fellow council members' concerns about the staff time that would take, considering that it does have to be confidential, and I'm not sure that that's a good use of our time right now, unfortunately, because I think it's a good thing. I know that one of my fellow council members actually just did an informal poll at one point, which was good information for me, and I think about those considerations when I think about appointments. But it sounds like it's probably a little bit too much of a burden on staff at this time. But if you can think of a way, if you and your fellow SEJC members can think of a way to do that in a way that unburdens staff while still being confidential, it might be something you can just ponder.
Do you need a motion? Or did that give you enough direction?
You can certainly make a motion so that it's part of the record.
Let's see, is there a staff recommendation? Provide direction.
Provide direction. You provided the direction. We'll post the EEO report.
I think the direction is pretty clear. Does the city attorney need a motion? No.
I think we have direction.
Okay, direction is good enough. All right, great. Excellent. All right, well, thank you. Thank you for coming. Thanks very much. And let's see. Next, that was the last and only new business, future agenda items. Does anyone have future agenda items?
Just not anything new.
Okay.
But there are a few outstanding ones.
Okay, and you had previously, the prior meeting, you said that you'd already spoken to staff about those, and okay. So that's underway. Now, announcements of city meetings and events. This seems a little sparse this time, but I think there was that one African American History Month event still.
I think it was tonight at the library.
Oh, was that the movie at the library? Okay, yes, I think I did see that and thought, oh, what a shame that it conflicts with our meeting. But I think several council members attended one of the events. Okay, I think that's it for our formal business, and if there's nothing else, we are adjourned.